Aloha kakahiaka ikomo mai. Good morning and welcome. How many of you folks have been in Hawaii? No. How many of you would like to go? Well, like it or not, that's where you're going this morning. Because I'm presenting a teaching story, or a series of teaching stories actually, which take place in old Hawaii. That's Hawaii before the time of Captain Cook, in which a young man learns the 7 principles of a Hawaiian shamanistic tradition. Now, I say a shamanistic tradition because in old Hawaii, shamanism was something that was handed down as a tradition in certain families. And promising young people, if they were not relatives, could be hanai'd. They were adopted into the family. Now, Serge King was adopted by the Kahili family, who were originally from Kauai, and he took their surname as his middle name, and he's been teaching the principles and shamanistic techniques now for close to half a century. And they were given to him not only through experience, but in the form of 7 key words in Hawaiian. So what Serge Kahili King then did was to formulate these principles as sentences so that they could be taught to audiences. And the 7 principles are a powerful distillation of the shamanic viewpoint, not just Hawaiian. They are attitudes and insights, beliefs of the ego, and enable you to work with the powers of the spirit world. Now, you might think that Hawaiian shamanism sounds like something extremely exotic, but in fact these principles are extremely effective in dealing with challenges in daily life. Now, teaching stories exist in every spiritual tradition. Think of the parables of Jesus. And traveling storytellers could provide not only entertainment, but also convey spiritual and moral teachings in their stories. Now, this is a long story because it has 10 episodes, but it will be illustrated by a number of works of art and paintings and woodblock prints done by various artists who either visited or lived in Hawaii. So, draw your chairs closer to the fire, make yourselves comfy, and listen to the tale, or what in Hawaiian pidgin would be called the talk story, of how the shaman taught the principles to his apprentice. A few centuries ago, on the island of Kauai, long before the native Hawaiians had ever heard of Captain Cook or the internet, there lived a young man about 16 named Kinohi. His father was a fisherman, and while on a fishing and trading expedition to the neighboring island of Oahu, he had caught sight of a young wahine performing hula kahiko, the old form of dance in honor of the akua, the gods. This was sacred dance, in which each subtle movement told a portion of a story of the akua. Leilani was so highly skilled and sensual in her performance that she ended as the visiting fisherman's wife and became Kinohi's mother. Now, and the boy had been named for one of 4 great shamans of immense mana who had visited the island long, long ago in order to save the islanders from a disaster. Mana is not, as many suppose, spiritual energy, but power in the sense of the power to have an influence. When they departed, they had left their mana in 4 large stones that still rested on the beach near Leilani's village, and they still rest there today. Kinohi, like his father, was a fisherman, but of late the youth had developed an increasingly strong spiritual streak. He would spend long hours near the heiau, the sacred temple of Lono, the god of agriculture. Here he felt the presence of the akua. He felt at peace and energized at the same time. And Kinohi's practices had been noticed by the Kahuna Kupua, who lived far away from the village, a long walk up a narrow valley between towering cliffs. A kahuna is a master or expert, and a Kahuna Kupua is a master shaman, a walker between the worlds. No one seemed to know the man's real name, and he was always referred to with respect as the master shaman. He seldom appeared in the village, and some were in awe of him and his powers. The priests of the order of Lono, who tended the heiau and performed the official rites, left him in peace. Others came to him, asking for healing of body or soul for either themselves or a family member. And one day, Kinohi, sitting by himself and musing on some spiritual mystery, suddenly found himself in the presence of the shaman, who was looking at him intently. Kinohi had never spoken to the man before, and felt distinctly uneasy. "Kinohi, do you feel close to the Akua?" The question took the young man by surprise, for no one had ever asked him this before, and he was somewhat at a loss for words. But the master knew that Kinohi, although a late starter, had the makings of a kupua, who would make use of his skills for the benefit of the people of the village. Kinohi was highly honored and excited by what the master said to him. But since he was not related to the kahuna, and such instruction is given only to family members in Hawaii, the master performed the ceremony of hanai, and Kinohi thereby became the man's adopted nephew. And Kinohi began to make the trek up the valley regularly to the small hut near the waterfall in order to talk to the kahuna and receive instruction from him. He began to learn how to calm his racing thoughts, how to become aware in his dreams that he was dreaming, how to contact forces for healing, how to become more conscious of the akua, and how to contact them directly. He would learn the shaman's attitudes to life and his assumptions about the way in which life operates, profound insights into the way of things. But always the lessons were intended to be practical and to fit Kinohi to be a true kupua, a healer for his people. Kinohi proved an apt pupil, but he also had a melancholic streak, not unusual in a pensive youth. The kahuna, who was always aware, it seemed, of Kinohi's thoughts, questioned him one day when again the young man had a long face. "What are your thoughts, Kinohi? You look as if you await the death of someone in your ohana," his extended family. After some inner struggle, Kinohi said, "I often doubt my fitness for the life of a kupua, its trials and tests, the responsibilities." "And what pictures do you see in your mind when you have such thoughts?" "I see myself performing a healing and the person gets no better and I look like a failure and a man of little mana. Or I call on the akua to aid me and they laugh at me." And the older man realized that Kinohi would need work on what we today call self-esteem and the necessity of having a, quote, positive self-image. But an important lesson could be given now. "Kinohi," the man said sharply, and he raised one finger. The youth knew that he was now to be given an important teaching. "Always remember that energy flows wherever your attention goes. When you see pictures in your mind of failure and ridicule, your own inner akua, your aumakua, receives a message that says as much as, 'Kinohi wants more failure in his life.' And sure enough, that is what Kinohi receives." The young man was startled. "Instead of thinking such dark thoughts, close your eyes and clear your mind," continued the master. And he began to suggest scenarios to Kinohi of village celebrations when everyone was exceptionally happy, of triumphs of fishing, of struggles successfully overcome. When he finished, Kinohi felt elated. "Would you want to spend your time, Kinohi, with other young fishermen who did nothing but make cruel jokes about your fishing skills and make you feel ashamed?" "Of course not," said Kinohi. "I would avoid such men." "Then why make friends with thoughts that weaken you, Kinohi, when you can spend time with thoughts that make you feel joy?" And during the coming days and weeks, the kahuna worked with Kinohi to develop his powers of concentration and how to banish all thoughts of failure. He learned the unwavering attention the healing required. And he learned that not only did energy follow wherever he placed his attention, but that the opposite was also true. The sacred heiau and high-ranking ali'i, or chiefs, automatically drew one's attention because of the energy they radiated. As, of course, did the Kahuna Kupua. Energy and attention were as closely related as brother and sister. And these teachings could all be summed up in the key word makia, focus, goal. As Kinohi became more adept at choosing his thoughts, his teacher knew that he was ready for another important insight, one of the most basic and far-reaching. The young man was becoming more and more skilled, becoming conscious in a dream, and even manipulating its content, what we today call lucid dreaming. "Kinohi, yesterday when you came to my hut, you looked as if the sun was shining out of your eyes." The youth had spoken of how well the previous day had gone, the perfect weather and waves, an unusually successful day's fishing. He was also quite proud of the amulet his teacher had given him, a pebble with a natural hole worn through it, a charm for protection and good luck while fishing. The older man had blessed it as he placed it around Kinohi's neck. Yes, that day you were a favored child of the Akua. But the time before that, you were angry when you came to see me. I had you stand under that waterfall with icy water pouring over you for a long time until you were ready to let go of the anger. Now tell me, do you remember the cause of that? A bit shamefacedly, for the reason now seemed trivial, he admitted that he had slept too long and had to run to the outrigger canoe where his friends were waiting for him. His hunger bothered him that morning and made him grumpy, and at one point he had lost his footing in the boat and bumped his head, hard enough for him to become furious. He had thoughts about the Akua. Did you feel the same way about your life on both mornings? No, replied Kinohi. On the one day I felt joyous as I went about my work, and the other time I felt groggy and out of sorts. The work seemed more difficult and the sun felt hotter. Then can you not see, said the Kahuna, how your mood filtered your view of life, the same way the mists and the clouds filter the sunlight? The same world and your life in it appeared to you in two completely different ways, depending on your beliefs about them, didn't they? And without waiting for an answer, the Kahuna continued, Kinohi, do you not see how you yourself, and only you, are responsible for how you experience your own life? But when things go wrong, when the fishing does not go well, when I get into an argument with someone, how can I not have a harsh attitude? No, Kinohi, bad things can happen, but the way you react to them is your choice. Such things are not punishments from the Akua. Look at these annoyances as challenges in your ability to choose to have a blessed and satisfying life. Then, taking another tack, his teacher asked his pupil how he was progressing in his attempts at lucid dreaming. He already well knew, but he was about to make a point. So, you are able to change what happens in your dreams. What if I were to tell you that this life of yours is also just a dream? Kinohi was startled. But how is that possible? Dreams seem like reality when I am in them. I can change what is taking place, but when I wake up, they often seem just like a story I was telling myself. And do you not tell yourself stories about your waking life? You have rules for understanding what you call reality, assumptions and interpretations. Can you not see how they create your experiences of life? And on reflection, Kinohi was forced to admit that they did. Your life and your world are your dream. And if you can change a dream, you can also change your life that is also a dream. Certainly there are rules we must follow, but those are merely the ones agreed upon by all for the sake of convenience. And you will be able to go beyond this ordinary dream of life, but that will be a teaching for another time. And for now, Kinohi, and the master raised one finger, know that the world is what you think it is. And a Kupua can change his world, can mold his dream into whatever he wishes. You are responsible. You are the dream weaver of your reality. You cannot blame anyone else for your experience of life. Not your relatives, nor the Akua, nor even your enemies. Kinohi's head swam. He felt as if the ground was giving way beneath him. Compared to a Kupua, the ordinary man or woman goes through life as if he or she had no responsibility for it. They merely accept what the ali'i or the priests tell them, as accepting as a dog cowering before its master. Now Kinohi felt fear. This was blasphemy. How could one doubt the words of those who had literally the power of life and death over one? The master placed his hand protectively on Kinohi's shoulder. This will all come as a great shock to you, I know. But the path of the Kupua is the path of the bold adventurer who discovers a new world, just as our ancestors risked death in order to discover these beautiful islands. The ordinary man or woman goes through their own dream of life without awareness and fears their own death. But a Kupua dies many times, dying to what he formerly considered to be the laws of reality in order to discover a far more powerful reality, the reality of the Akua and their world. And never let yourself be overcome by fear. Fear will make you forget that you are the dream weaver of your life. But enough for today. Continue the ways that I have taught you, and we will talk again soon. You have much to think about. Of that, Kinohi had no doubt. His views of reality were changing, and he knew that the Master was taking him on a voyage into unknown parts. And this new teaching that was summed up by the word Ike, knowing, awareness, preoccupied him for days and weeks to come. Not long after, still troubled in spirit, but excited as well, Kinohi came to visit the Kahuna. Kinohi, you know the game of Ulu Maika, do you not? Of course he did. The game was commonly played by everyone, especially during the festival of Makahiki dedicated to the Akua Lono. A player attempted to roll a disc-shaped stone between two stakes set up about 6 inches apart, somewhat similar to modern lawn bowling. Kinohi, what would happen, do you suppose, if you used only one stake, stood twice as far away, and threw the stone into the sea? That would be ridiculous. You would not be playing Ulu Maika at all, just something of your own choosing. Of course, said the Master, all games must have rules. Otherwise, there would be no challenge or enjoyment in playing them. And the rules of life are similar. But when these agreed-upon rules become inescapable laws, kapu, taboos, we cannot be creative, and we feel hopeless and helpless before the Akua. A Kupua, however, follows his own rules, and they are not the same as those others follow. But what of the kapu? Kinohi was referring to the numerous taboos. Like many other Polynesian words, the original T had become a K sound in Hawaiian. The kapu were inflexible laws of the land, and to transgress them often brought instant death. What of the kapu? Let me ask you, were they decreed by the Akua themselves, or by the priests and alii, the chiefs? Kinohi was confused. But do not the priests and alii make such pronouncements as they are instructed by the Akua? The Kahuna remained silent until Kinohi began to doubt his own beliefs. When the alii decree a kapu on fishing in a certain bay each year, it is done for practical reasons. The fish have nearly all been caught, and it takes a certain amount of time for their numbers to be replenished. This is completely akamai, wise and intelligent. Otherwise, there would be no fish to eat. But what about the kapu on men and women eating together? What about the kapu about looking directly at one of the alii, or of not letting their shadow fall across you? Do you believe that this is akamai? And he waited for this to sink in. Now Kinohi felt fear again. But he had to admit that some of the kapu seemed more than arbitrary. In fact, although the people were loath to say so, many felt that the kapu were intended to increase the power of the priests and hereditary chiefs, and that many of the increasing restrictions hindered the satisfactions of life. But, Kinohi stammered, without the kapu there would be no limits. Our lives would break down. Precisely, said the Kahuna. There are no limits. What do you think of that, Kinohi? And the man's expression conveyed to his pupil that this was a fundamental teaching indeed. Think of the world of the Akua. Do you feel that world is limited? No. Do you find limits in the world of your dreams? No. And they do not exist for the Kupua either. If you wish to change some aspect of your existence, you must be willing to follow the ways of the Kupua. Do not transgress the traditions of our people or the kapu. The ordinary man or woman needs many rules to follow. But a Kupua lives in a different world with different rules. Tell me, you have already begun to learn some of the laws of changing ordinary reality. He was referring, of course, to magic. Do you see any kapu to learning to use that power? You are living in a universe vast beyond your power to conceive. But everything in that universe is connected. All people are connected. We breathe the same air. We share each other's thoughts and feelings. The same energies pass through everyone. Moana, the ocean, does not separate these islands on which we live. It connects them. All things in the universe are connected energetically. And with magic, one can manipulate the different energies of life and make whatever changes are desired. You are limited only by your own limiting beliefs. You have no excuse to say something is impossible. Anything is possible to a Kupua. You must merely find the right way to do it. As the wise say, No cliff is too high to be climbed. And if your undertaking fails, simply find another way to do it. And Kinohi, his mind reeling with new possibilities, took leave of his teacher in a daze. He was so preoccupied he hardly noticed the cliffs, the greenery, even the path itself. But the word kala, freedom, now had a whole new meaning for him. And it would remain the inward freedom of the kupua, for the kahuna had warned him that what they had discussed that day would be under a strict kapu, and under no circumstances should Kinohi mention such ideas to anyone else. During the following months, Kinohi continued to work with the kahuna, developing his skills of healing and magic and his perceptions of life. He was of an age to marry, and he took a wife from among the girls of a nearby village. Soon they would be expecting their first child. But nothing could hinder Kinohi from his work with the shaman. Kinohi's wife found he could be distant when preoccupied with something his teacher had taught him. And he would sometimes procrastinate when a chore beckoned, for the contemplation of the world of the spiritual powers held more charm for him than repairing the hole in the roof of their hut. He had, however, one problem that preyed on his mind. One of the members of his ohana had insulted a fisherman from another village, and the insult was thought to be serious enough that it caused an unpleasant dispute between the two families involved. The memory of the incident, which Kinohi had witnessed, rankled him, and he worried over what the outcome might be in the future and whether it could even lead to violence. This uneasiness was visible in his face when he next met with his teacher. After Kinohi had related the incident and his concerns about it, the older man transfixed his pupil with his gaze and asked him, "Kinohi, when you remember this incident, are you actually in the time when it happened?" "No, of course not. It is a memory." "And in what time does a memory take place?" "Whenever I think about it, it's there." "Do you mean right now, in the moment when you think about it, and not in the past?" "Yes, of course." "And of all the other memories you have of the incidents in your life, where are they? When are they happening when you think of them?" And Kinohi began to realize that all of his past, everything that had ever happened to him, and even all of the traditions of his people and of the akua could only exist for him in the present moment when he thought about them. "And your expectations of what will happen, Kinohi, are they actually in the future or only present at the moment when you think of them?" The young man realized the impasse into which his teacher had led him. "Exactly, Kinohi. All of your recollections of the past and all of your hopes and fears of the future can only exist in the present. Now is the moment of power. You can't get wet from yesterday's rain, and you can't be scorched by tomorrow's sun. Whenever you dwell on the past, whenever you are not in the present, you are not in the moment of power. Now, let your thoughts travel farther. The past consists only of your memories and how you feel about them, and you carry them around with you as your thoughts and your stories. But if you pay attention to the past or to the future, you can do so only in the present moment. And what is in the present can, as you know by now, be changed. A kupua does not continually tell himself the same self-defeating story." "But I cannot change what has already taken place, can I?" "No, but you can change your memory of it. Tell yourself a different story about it and give it a different outcome in the future. Interpret it in a better light. Even make up a few details. Why not tell yourself the best story you can?" And in the ensuing teaching, the master reminded Kinohi of how his present thoughts and expectations inexorably created his future, and not merely what we call the law of attraction, but the potential of creating a wholly new reality. And the teachings could be summed up in the word manawa, meaning time, now, this present moment. Over the coming days, Kinohi practiced being in the present. Rather than idly daydreaming, he would follow the shaman's instructions and quickly look at a tree or a hut, listen to a bird's call or the surf, and touch the fabric of his kapa or bark cloth garment. By being more aware of the input of his senses, his mana increased. And the more he experienced being in the moment, the more his procrastination, his refusal to be in the here and now, disappeared. And he repaired the hole in the thatched roof of his hut. And Kinohi's visualizations and prayers for a happy solution to the family dispute seem to have had a positive effect, but that is a story for another time. Kinohi arrived at the master's hut one morning just as a thunderstorm was approaching. The young man was unaware that he was about to learn an important life lesson. So, Kinohi, what can you tell me about aloha, love? Automatically, he began to talk about his wife, their relationship, their situation in the ohana, their hope for children and grandchildren, etc., until the kahuna cut him short. Kinohi, he said sternly, I was in the village 2 evenings ago and passed by your hut. You were berating your woman without let-up. What was the meaning of that? The young man would hasten to defend his actions. Twice now she has come close to ruining the pattern on a fine piece of kapa that she and some other women were decorating. Her thoughts often travel into the inner world and she pays no attention to what she be doing. I've heard talk about it in the village. Like many other people, Kinohi was slow to recognize his own idiosyncrasies when they were mirrored in another. The more experienced man sighed and said, Kinohi, I know that this is also not the first time you have scolded your wife and insulted her and brought her to tears. You have much to learn about love. And after a pause, he said to the now ashamed student, look at the root words from which aloha results. Oha, joyful. Alo, sharing. Ha, breath or life energy. Alo, presence. Aloha is sharing the overflowing energy of life with another, face to face, in joy and happiness. When you experience aloha, you enjoy each other's presence. You feel good about the other person. You have fun and laugh with them. But when you feel anger and wish to blame the other for their shortcomings or for the lack of happiness in your life, and you criticize them, then you are living without aloha. Kinohi remained silent, for it was all too true. Finally, he asked timidly, but how can I get her to pay more attention when she works? Aloha increases as you praise and appreciate. It decreases with judgment and criticism. Has she never once created a design that was beautiful? Yes, he replied. Usually her work is very good. Then remind her of that next time she helps to create a beautiful garment. Show appreciation for what she does well. This will build aloha. If you need to criticize something she has done, follow it with a compliment. Tell her it's not up to her usual excellent standard. She will relax and be more open to what you say. If you constantly push the image of a ruined design in front of her eyes, she will ruin another one. And Kinohi suddenly remembered that how whenever one frequently dwelt on something, it had a habit of manifesting. Do you have happy times with your woman? Asked the master. And when Kinohi answered in the affirmative, he said, the happy part comes from aloha, and the unhappy part from your criticism, your blame, and your anger. You have much more to learn about aloha, Kinohi. It is a subject as vast as the stars, but the meaning of the word must be understood and practiced. As the storm broke and the rain lashed down, Kinohi felt as if his misconceptions about life were being washed away and his inner being cleansed. The two men sat for a long time in silence, the kahuna allowing the lesson to sink in. As the hour grew late, the older man seemed to sink into a reverie. His eyes half closed and his breathing fell into a very slow and deep rhythm. Suddenly he coughed and a voice much higher than his own came from his throat. Kinohi, when you share aloha, you are opening to the mana of the akua. Aloha is a divine power. And I of aloha. I am laka. Kinohi was startled, but it was not the first time the kahuna had gone into trance and allowed an akua to speak through him. The young man listened intently because he was in direct communication with the akua of love. And Laka amazed Kinohi as she went on. Kinohi, you will lose strength, pleasure, and mana whenever you think ill of anyone. And this means you yourself as well. No kupua can work successfully if he doubts himself. Give the healing power of aloha to yourself as well. Give yourself much aloha, Become a being of aloha. The voice seemed to come from farther away. One of the roots of aloha is ha, the breath, the divine life energy in you. As you connect more and more strongly with this power, you will breathe aloha. Your very presence will heal. You will find your own voyage in life less stormy. Kinohi wondered whether being a man of aloha could possibly cause many of the annoyances of daily life to vanish. It seemed a bit too good to be true. And the question in his mind must have been heard by the goddess, because he heard the words, "Your path along the shore will consist of more smooth sand and fewer sharp lava rocks." The voice of the Akua faded away, and Kinohi was left in a state of awe at this vision of his future. And over the coming weeks, he would wonder at the revelation that just as energy and attention were like a brother and sister, so were aloha and mana siblings. But Kinohi had yet further lessons to learn regarding aloha. Kukane was another young fisherman in the village and had been a boyhood playmate of Kinohi. But Kukane had also been attracted to the girl who became Kinohi's wife, and jealousy began to grow inside him. He took to belittling Kinohi's abilities in fishing and games and whispering behind his back. His presence eventually became loathsome to Kinohi, and he longed for revenge. But the kahuna had warned him of the endless ripples caused by harmful magic, and so Kinohi merely seethed. But now there was to be a surfing competition among the villagers. People from other villages would attend as well. Kinohi and Kukane were both good surfers, having been on surfboards almost as soon as they could walk. But Kukane sneered at Kinohi's skills and boasted of how he would certainly best him in the contest. Kinohi, in a dark mood, complained of this on his next visit to the kahuna. "If you were confident enough in your abilities, Kinohi, you would pay as little attention to his taunts as you would to the sand fleas. And you seem to think that if you swallow fish poison, perhaps it will make Kukane ill." And the master shaman reminded his student of the practice of cleansing himself of all negative energies, purifying himself of doubts, and visualizing himself as a winner in the contest. When the day arrived, hundreds of people were on the beach to watch the excitement. Kinohi's teacher was with him. Kukane, naturally, was strutting and preening himself. But the shaman's only comment to Kinohi was to quote the old proverb, "Show your knowledge of surfing on the back of a wave." Kinohi did quite well. Although he did not come out as the first place winner, his technique was excellent and many people praised him. Kukane, however, had overplayed his hand. While attempting a particularly daring move, he lost his footing and fell into the sea. When he reached the beach, still coughing up water, he tried to make excuses to those to whom he had boasted, but no one was having it, and their jokes and raw insults were more than a little humbling. Kukane left the beach, his face red with shame, and went to sit by himself behind some large boulders and lick his wounds. Kinohi sauntered up to his teacher with a huge smile on his face. "Did you see that braggart fall head first into the sea? The expression on his face when he reached the beach reminded me of a small child when he loses a well-loved plaything." But Kinohi was in for a shock. Rather than praising him for his performance and gloating with him over Kukane's failure, the kahuna looked sternly into Kinohi's eyes and said, "Now, Kinohi, go over to Kukane and thank him for being your opponent. Commiserate with him over his misfortune, and take him some of that mahi-mahi that was provided for the competitors." Kinohi could hardly believe what his teacher had just said. Such a loss of face and mana that would be. But in no way could he ever refuse the demands of the Kahuna Kupua. He swallowed hard, gathered up the fish, and slowly walked over to where Kukane sat. A few minutes later, the kahuna was gratified to see the two rivals break down in tears and embrace. "Now how do you feel?" asked his teacher when Kinohi returned. Kinohi looked slightly dazed. It was not at all what I expected. His resentment melted, as did my feelings of being better than him. Our old friendship may have been rekindled. I feel more complete somehow and lighter, as if I suddenly let go of a burden of stones on my back. The more aloha you give, the more aloha you will receive. And Kinohi was again struck by the intimate connection between aloha and mana. It was the season of hurricanes. But despite the dangers, the fishermen were compelled to catch fish for the village. The mariners used all of their accumulated knowledge of winds and waves, seasonal differences, and all other known factors to avoid the great storms. One morning, after a luau that had lasted into the wee hours, Kinohi overslept. A yell from one of his fellows had roused him, and he rushed out to join the crew of the outrigger. The skies had appeared friendly that morning, and the sea was calm, and the men had sailed out further than usual, when dark clouds began to form on the horizon with amazing rapidity. The sea began to lurch and heave, and the sail was struck so as not to catch the now howling winds. As the outrigger canoe slid down towering waves, the men hung on for dear life, praying not to be swept overboard. The canoe swept with almost terrifying speed in the direction of the land, and as it came close to a projecting spur of lava rock, the single outrigger was smashed to pieces, leaving the craft at the mercy of Kanaloa, the Akua of the sea. There was now a real danger of both drowning and of being crushed against the rocks. Kinohi reached for his protective amulet and realized to his horror that in his haste to reach the boat, he had left it in the hut. Desperately, he tried to remember the sacred chants to Kanaloa, but in the chaos of the waves crashing down on the boat, he found himself unable to remember them. All he could do was to remember the face of his beloved teacher, the Kahuna Kupua. Kinohi fervently pictured his teacher, wondering if he would ever see him again, and he continued to hold on tightly as he could while he concentrated on his master. After what seemed like a never-ending nightmare came a harsh, scraping jolt as the canoe was thrown onto a lonely, sandy beach. Fortunately, no lives had been lost, and once the storm had abated, the men were able to slowly make their way back to the village. Kinohi wasted no time the following day in making his way to the master's hut, and he vividly related the story and his fears to the older man. "In my haste, I had forgotten the amulet you gave me, and in the horrors of the storm, I forgot the sacred chants as well. I felt that the Akua had truly abandoned us to our doom, and I thought only of you, and somehow the Akua brought us safely back. By picturing me, you were able to connect with my mana. I was aware of the storm and of the danger you faced. But now, we must speak more deeply of the Akua and their powers." And the mood in the hut was such that Kinohi knew that his teacher was about to impart another major lesson. Kinohi, when you picture the Akua in your mind and call upon them, how do they come to you? "I sometimes hear their voices inside me, or see a symbol when they wish to send me a message." Kinohi was proud of his abilities to contact the Akua as his teacher had taught him. "Sometimes, too, they communicate with me through a deep feeling in my gut." Would the Akua exist for you without your mind? Kinohi became uneasy, knowing that once again his teacher was leading his thoughts into an impasse like a seabird into a trap. And without waiting for an answer, the master continued, "You can only experience the Akua and the divine world within your own mind. Outside of your mind, Kinohi, the Akua do not exist." This was blasphemy. "But I see the sun and the clouds in the sky, the waves in the sea, and the birds and other creatures. No, they are not my creations. They were here before me and will exist after my final journey to the spirit world." If you did not experience the divine forces inside of you, they would not exist for you. "But if the Akua exist for me only within my mind, how then do I exist in relation to them outside of me? How am I capable of having the wondrous visions that I have of them, as if I were totally outside of myself?" The Kahuna smiled slightly as he asked, "Remember, Kinohi, that there are no limits. Tell me, where do you leave off and the Akua begin?" The question seemed nonsensical, but the veil between Kinohi and the world of the Akua was growing thinner and thinner. In a slightly ironic tone of voice, the master went on, "Kinohi experiences the forces of the Akua. Kinohi becomes one at times with these powers. Kinohi can experience them only in his own mind. Kinohi's mind is far larger than he thinks." Suddenly, as if struck by a bolt of lightning, the barrier between Kinohi and the world of the Akua collapsed. Kinohi saw himself in the sky, surrounded by stars, energetic forces, the powers of the Akua. He felt as if every energy in the universe was pouring through him in streams of colors. The Akua loved him. Their powers were his powers. His life was his to do with as he willed. This expanded state of awareness left him in ecstasy, and tears poured down his face. The Kahuna Kupua wept as well as he raised his hands and pronounced the ancient sacred phrase spoken before a spiritual revelation. Ahuvale kananehuna. Let that which is hidden be revealed. And he placed his hands on the head of his adopted nephew and blessed him. As Kinohi left the master's hut sometime later, he felt as if the clouds supported his feet. In the days to come, Kinohi spent much time with the Kahuna, integrating what he had experienced. He was filled with wonder and excitement, and he had many questions. Master, if the Akua and their powers are inside me, if everything I experience of the universe is inside of me, then I must possess enormous mana. This, his teacher affirmed, emphasizing the responsibility such abilities brought with them, since a kupua could claim the right to change things. And he emphasized how the principle of aloha should act as a guiding star to the young man. But Master, if the akua are within me, and I pray to them and offer sacrifices to them, am I then doing these things to myself? You are doing these things for those powers within you. If you experience our Creator, Kane, and know him and his mana within your own mind, then you are praying and sacrificing to the Kane within you, not to Kinohi, who is merely a reflection of this divine mind, living and working on this island as a mortal. But Master, I love the Akua. I cannot renounce my belief in them, nor do you need to. It is good to worship the Akua, Kinohi. It will help to keep you humble and aligned with your path. By picturing the Akua in your mind, giving them a name, knowing their stories, you make it easier to work with their energies. And even though the Akua are ultimately within you, and the Master smiled, they will still act as if they were independent of you. And since I now know these things, are the same prayers and spoken intentions to be used as before? Kinohi was referring to what we today call affirmations. If they work for you and inspire you, why not? But remember this, Kinohi, and the Master looked deeply into his eyes. All power, all mana comes from within. If you cannot find that mana within you, you will never find it outside of you. Those words you use, the prayers and spells, the spoken intentions, all these are merely tools for you to use. They are not magical or powerful in themselves. The magic is in you. Energy flows where attention goes. The intentions you constantly repeat are merely to help you to keep your focus. And more, Kinohi learned that although becoming a kupua might entail learning many new things and acquiring mana, much of the process actually consisted of unlearning, letting go of limiting beliefs about oneself and about what was possible. During the year after Kinohi's sudden enlightenment, he worked hard at both his fishing and his healing skills as a kupua. As a man of power, of great mana, he would need to tread carefully and use his skills wisely. One day, the use of one's powers was the topic of the lesson, for Kinohi had brought up the subject of Kahikili, a shaman in another part of the island, who had used fear to control the people in his village. From the stories he had heard, Kahikili constantly engaged in harmful magic and had even made use of the dreadful ana, the death curse, to deal with his enemies. Fortunately, the man had departed for good for the spirit world. Master, you teach me constantly of the ways of mana, and I have learned how to acquire it, and you emphasize aloha. But what of Kahikili? Was he not a man of tremendous mana? And yet there seemed to be little aloha in him. The kahuna waited some time before speaking in order to weigh his words carefully. There was an all-important lesson in this story. Kinohi, how do you wish to be seen by the villagers in your work as a kupua? I want to be respected as a man of mana. and as a man of healing. I want to feel their trust and help keep the people aligned with their truth and goodness. Do you think Kahekili accomplished that? He mistook mana for control. He was not a force for healing. There was no aloha in him at all. And what do you think was his motivation? More and more mana? No, Kinohi. Fear. Fear of being powerless, a man without mana. He hated other people for the sense of powerlessness he felt, even though it came from within himself. And he separated himself more and more from the villagers. The darkness inside him altered him, and his facial features grew more and more ugly. His own children fled to another village, and the people hated him. Certainly, he could do certain things. He had certain powers, but he brought only misery to others in his own self-seeking. Do you call that a successful and happy life, Kinohi? His powers brought him no satisfaction. And one day, as he stood on a cliff and prepared to perform yet another work of harm, he suddenly clutched at his stomach, collapsed, and rolled off into the sea. What the sharks left of him washed up on a beach the following day. Like other kupua who deal only in magic that does harm to others, he was poisoned inside by his own darkness. Such men often die before they are ripe with years. Always work with aloha, Kinohi. Otherwise, you will be ineffective as a force for healing, for the means you use will determine the end result. And after a pause, the kahuna continued, effectiveness is the measure of truth. And if you are effective in your life and actions, this means you are expressing your own spiritual truth, pono, rightness, harmony, goodness, everything in its right place. Ask yourself, Kinohi, does the way that you live your life work for you? Your work as a fisherman, your family life. Do you see anything that is lacking or needs improvement? Look at your work as a kupua. Do you find that the mana of the akua flows through you harmoniously? Do the techniques you have learned maintain their effectiveness? Do they help to heal people and bring them into alignment with their own sense of rightness? These are the questions you must often ask yourself. And if you find anything that does not work, that is ineffective, know that you must examine your beliefs about it. And if what you believe does not create a world to your liking, you can change those beliefs. Always, healing is the goal. And this can only be effective when you work from aloha. And, Kinohi, the best way to accomplish anything with aloha is simply to bless everyone and everything that has anything to do with what you want. Give compliments and praise to things that are good. Give blessings that favorable conditions will increase or will endure. Express gratitude to others and to the akua. You will become a true man of aloha. The kahuna became silent. He had said all that needed to be said. And Kinohi marveled at the profundity and beauty of the lifeway he had chosen. And with that, I would like to say that you have been a lovely and very patient audience, and I thank you for your very kind attention. Mahalo nui loa.